Hello everyone and welcome to the workshop today. My name is Jo Grimmond and I come to you from the other side of the world in Australia where we're coming into spring now and it's getting warmer and warmer. So I'm thinking of you as you change your season as well. I'm just going to share my screen now. And we're going to talk about measurement today and what we can do with our children to measure. And there will be lots of time at the end for you to ask questions. So if you think of any questions throughout the workshop today, feel free to ask some questions at the end of the presentation. So we're going to look at bringing maths to life in the home, exploring measurement. So just before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the Abu Dhabi Early Childhood Authority. Without them, we would not be able to bring you this amazing opportunity to engage in these workshops, and we thank them for making this initiative a reality during these difficult times that we find ourselves in across the world. In Australia, we like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. So I'm going to do that before we present. We like to do that. So I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the many lands across Australia. I acknowledge the contribution made by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with particular reference to the education of young children, and I recognise their existence long before our story began. I come to you from the east coast of Australia in a small place that is about 6-hour drive from Sydney, if you're aware of where Sydney is. And where I work is at the University of Wollongong, which you can see Wollongong on the screen now. And Wollongong was traditionally owned by the Wadi Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation, but I come to you from Yuin country on the south coast of New South Wales. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to just revisit the importance of mathematics in the early years and why we need to be doing it with our children. We're going to explore how we can see maths in the home and in our everyday. And we're going to look at the importance of developing measurement skills with our children for later maths achievement. And we'll be engaging in some fun measurement activities today together with materials that you can find in your home. So before we start playing with measurement and looking at measuring things in our home, I just want to focus a moment on the importance of maths in the early years. So first of all, you are your child's first teacher. So I really encourage you to explore maths concepts through play with your child. The long-term effects of poor early mathematical ability on people's health and well-being is quite extraordinary when we think about it, and it highlights the need of high-quality mathematics education in the early years. So as your child's first teacher and most important teacher in their life, you can certainly have a very important role to play in this. In recent times, there's been a growing recognition of the importance of mathematics and STEM learning in early years education, and research has certainly demonstrated the relationship between proficiency in maths in the early years and later maths achievement in school and beyond. So we need to be doing it early, don't we? Research highlights the critical importance of maths learning in the early years as a very strong predictor of later maths achievement. In fact, research has found that mathematics knowledge is a better predictor of life success than literacy, which I found very fascinating. And poor early mathematics knowledge and experience is linked to greater likelihood of unemployment, poor pay and prospects, homelessness, disadvantage, health issues, and particularly in females, which I found interesting as well. Sometimes our own beliefs as adults about how maths influence and certainly influence our confidence in playing with maths with our children. And for many people, a dislike of mathematics can be linked to a lack of understanding of how maths is embedded in our daily life. Learning to recognise maths concepts and processes in our daily lives can help bring about a new appreciation of mathematics and have a positive influence on our own beliefs about and attitudes towards mathematics. I certainly have memories when I think about when I was growing up and had in my experiences at school with maths, and I was quite proficient at maths. However, I had a teacher that didn't do much for my self-confidence and self-esteem. So it certainly impacted my feelings towards maths. I lost a lot of confidence through those early engagements with that particular teacher. It's certainly also well documented that many educators and teachers and adults who experience fear and even anxiety in relation to maths may avoid it completely in the early years. And we know that that's the time where our brain grows. So we need to be doing lots and lots more with our children in the early years. And when I'm talking about early years, I'm talking particularly from birth to 5, but also birth to 8 years of age. And this is much the same in the home learning environment, where our attitudes as parents towards maths may certainly impact how we approach it in the home. So by keeping things simple, and I'm going to give you some ideas about doing that today, and keeping it playful and thoughtful will certainly help us understand this as well. And so we can play along with our children with maths. And this is why it's important to keep it playful and focus on the processes and exploration of maths learning. And a common belief when talking about maths is that it is something that you are just good at or not good at. Sometimes you might hear someone say that they have a maths brain. But according to researchers, this reflects a belief that mathematics achievement depends on our ability, as opposed to the belief that if you really try hard, you can achieve in maths. So this belief is linked to effort. Having a mathematical mindset, like you can see on the screen now, is having the ability to actually improve and extend our knowledge in mathematics, that we are all capable of learning and improving in maths. So we need to have more of a growth mindset when it comes to engaging with mathematics with our children. We need to see ourselves as facilitators of mathematical exploration. So when we're talking about measurement skills, what are we talking about? Well, measurement is making comparisons, and that's the beginning of measurement. Young children understand basic concepts of one thing being bigger or longer or heavier and so on in relation to another. They compare length, capacity, weight, area, volume, time and temperature, and we're going to touch on a couple of those things today. The measurement of length, mass, volume and area has many real-world applications. Measurement represents opportunities to use numbers in our everyday lives and to link mathematical concepts in very practical ways. Many measurement opportunities are provided in water, block play, sand play, and particularly in the home cooking experiences. So I encourage you to cook with your children, get them engaged, have them engaged in measuring out the ingredients and talking to them through that and pouring things into the bowl like you can see on the screen. Engage them in your cooking. So there's certainly many ways in which we can incorporate measurement in the home learning environment. I'm going to talk about that today. So revisiting, you might have got word that I wanted you to put some loose parts together in a loose parts box. So if you haven't had time to do that, that's okay. So after the workshop, you'll be able to play with materials with your children and engage in some measurement, like we're going to talk about that. So if you haven't had a chance to collect some materials that you have in the home, then you can collect some after the workshop and practice some measurement games later today that we're going to go through today. So you can see some examples, but really it is any loose parts that you have in the home. So you might use pegs, sticks, stones you find in the garden, or flowers or leaves, pine cones, nuts, beads, coins, marbles, Lego pieces, counters, anything really that is reasonably small. Coloured pencils or markers are great too, as you can draw and represent numbers in measurement. Kitchen containers and cutlery you can use as well. Buttons are fabulous if you have a spare button collection. There are then lots and lots of ways to play with those loose parts. Today we're going to focus on measurement, but if you've engaged in previous workshops, you'll would have learned about how to engage in some number activities and some patterning and symmetry activities as well. So I encourage you to play with loose parts with your children in a number of ways. So I've put some loose parts together for measurement today. And as you can see, I've got some Lego here, some Duplo Lego that we can use for measurement. So Lego is a great way to engage in measurement. I have some little small pieces of Lego as well, but you can use everyday pegs that are the same size for measurement, or children love to use their own toys. So I've got some cars, some Matchbox cars that you could use to compare with measurement as well. You can use marbles as a great way to explore volume and capacity. So I have some marbles today as well. What else have I got? So we've got some markers that you can use for measurement as well, measuring length. And I have some Nerf little foam toys that you can use that are the same size. So really anything that's the same size, even balls like this, we can explore volume and capacity with balls. And blocks, I have some blocks that are the same size that you can engage in. But we all have feet. So, so you can use your feet to explore measurement as well, and we're going to watch a little video about that too today. So and you can see sticks are a great way. So find things that are the same size or very similar size, especially when you're looking at exploring length measurement. So what are the measurable attributes, what we like to call attributes? So measuring is all about finding how long, how tall, how heavy, how fast, or how much area something has. We're talking now about the many attributes we use in measuring. So we're talking about length, height, mass, capacity, volume, and even time. But when we're going to explore length, we're going to explore weight, we're going to explore volume today and capacity as well. And then you can explore lots of things after the workshop as well. So children have experiences spontaneously with measuring from a young age, though most of this is informal and often they are inaccurate in their choice of terms. For example, they might use big and little when referring to length, size, and even age rather than just size. They might refer to a little sister being bigger than her friend. Their hand is smaller than their parent's hand. They have a bigger friend when they mean an older friend. So before children can learn how to measure, they need experiences with the various attributes that you can see on the screen now, and to learn the correct language. The language they use with the varied attributes of length is how long or how tall something is, capacity, how much something holds, weight, how heavy it is, how much, and area, how much space is covered, and time. Events take more or less time than each other. These experiences that children have when exploring these attributes occur through play. Research has shown that understandings of these measurement attributes begin to develop in the early years, and young children know attributes such as mass and length exist, although they may not be able to measure them accurately. For example, even 2- and 3-year-olds know that if they have some Play-Doh and you give them some more, they have more than they did before. So even then they're engaging in measurement. So before we examine the attributes of measurement and play with some of those things with our loose parts, I want to build your understanding around what are the units of measurement. So when I showed you the pegs and the Lego and the balls, they're all what's called informal units of measurement, so non-standard units of measurement. So measuring is the process of identifying a unit and subdividing that object by that unit by placing it end to end, or iterating or repeating it alongside the object that you are measuring. Children may become familiar with rulers from older siblings, so like you can see on the screen, there's lots of measuring with tape measures there. And they may be familiar with tape measures by watching us measuring things in a house, like in the kitchen, or if you're doing renovations, or in the garden when you're building a garden bed, for example. So they've had experience already by watching us measure. So it's just as important to give children experiences with informal measurement as well. And here we're talking about things like popsicle sticks, string, hands as measurement, feet as measurement, measuring units, blocks, the Lego that I just showed you, and any other resource like marbles or little blocks, anything, markers, crayons, anything that's the same size that they could potentially use to measure. Informal measurement and comparison are used more extensively in our daily lives than more formal standardised measures. So in the early years, most of the measurement experiences are associated with comparison. So children love to compare the size of things, particularly how high something is or how long something is. They make predictions and they estimate. And it's through these experiences and activities with measurement that children gain a broader understanding of those attributes that I was talking about earlier. They're learning to measure. And the first step in understanding measurement and using processes like that is recognising that all objects and events have measurable attributes. We can measure them. So one of my favourite ways to explore measurement is to use what I like to call measuring tools. And it could be, which is different than a standardised ruler, for example, or a height chart. I've seen a piece of string being used really effectively as a measure to find the middle part of things. So I encourage you to have a go with using measuring tools that aren't just tape measures and rulers in the home. Other things that you could use: straws, pencils, cups or small containers for measuring volume, and blocks or marbles for measuring mass and measuring capacity. So again, we could pose a measurement problem to our child, getting them to think of what they could measure in our home. What could they use for measuring it? What informal or non-standardised units of measurement could we use? Could we use pegs, or could we use Lego, or could we use our Matchbox cars? Children love to measure, so they might be measuring all their furniture and toys with you. They just love it. So getting them to suggest what they could use to measure those things is really great as well. And cooking, like I said before, is also another great opportunity to explore measurement when measuring ingredients. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a moment. And just ask Alex if he could play the little video that I have for you to watch today on looking at non-standardised measuring tools like we've just been talking about. So thanks, Alex.
Today we are going to learn about non-standard measurement. What are non-standard units of measurement? Non-standard units of measurements can be any items that you use to measure something. For example, pennies, paper clips, beans, your shoes, straws, counters, or popsicle sticks. Some rules to follow when you are using non-standard forms of measuring is that the object that you use must be the same size. You always start at the edge and not in the middle, and make sure to have no overlaps or gaps. You can pretty much measure with anything. So let's practice measuring some things. How many paper clips long is the crayon? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The crayon is about 7 paper clips long. How many cubes long is the boat? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The boat is about 8 cubes long. You can also measure with your feet. I decided to measure my scarf using my steps. Let's see what happened. I took 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. My scarf is about 7 steps long. Notice I didn't leave any gaps between my steps, and I didn't make my steps overlap each other either. Now it's your turn. Find something to measure at home with your feet. Let me know how many steps long your item is. Some things you can measure with your feet include how long your couch is, how long one of your rugs are, how long your bed is, or how long your table is. Good luck.
Thanks, Alex. So that just was just to give you an idea of how you could use those informal measurement tools to measure with your child. Okay, so when we're measuring length, just like you saw in that short little video there, children love to, and going back to that video, children love to measure you. So make sure you lay down and let your child measure you with their feet, and then measure your child with your feet, and compare and talk about the size of your feet, how different your feet are to your child's. That's exploring measurement as well. So see what you can find in your house to measure with your feet. But when we're talking about linear measurement, according to those researchers that you can see on the screen now, it involves 6 concepts, which look a little bit complicated, but they're not. But I just want to give you a little bit of information on how, how it works. So partitioning is the mental activity of dividing an object into equal size amounts. And this is not obvious to children, as it involves seeing the object as something that can be divided before it's actually measured. So it's really important to practice this measuring with children using lots of different informal measuring tools like we've just talked about. And the unit, what's called unit iteration, which is the repetition of that unit, is the ability to think of the length of a unit as part of the length of the object being measured. So comparing it next to, so comparing a big long line of blocks with a line of things like matchbox cars that your child compares it to. So that's what I'm talking about there. And transivity is the understanding that if the length of object A and B is the same, and objects B is the same length as object C, then B and C are the same length as well. So you're transferring that knowledge from one context to the other. And the concept conservation of length refers to the understanding that as an object is moved, then the length doesn't change. And the accumulation of distance is the understanding that as you repeat a unit along the length of an object and count it, the number words signify the space covered by all the units. And the relation to the number requires children to recognise their understanding from counting of the units to the measure. So knowing that when counting the units, the last number that they count in the counting sequence represents the total number of the units, the measuring units. So I just want to give you a little bit of background knowledge about that. So let's measure. So look at your loose parts if you've got some in front of you, or collect some after the workshop and get measuring with your child. So I'm just going to give you some examples here. So you might have different things in your loose parts box, but look for things that are the same, around about the same size, and think about what you can measure as well. It could be your child's toy. They love measuring their toys. They love measuring how tall their teddy bears are, or their dolls, or their furniture in the house. So start with something that's meaningful to them, and line up those informal units end to end. So iterate that measurement along that line, and to line each one up and compare it against, just like you can see. You could even cut out trace around your shoe or your foot, and then use things like those paper clips, or you might use some Lego to measure and compare the sizes. Count them and write down your results. So this is really important too, and compare it. Get your child to lie down and you measure them with your feet, and they measure you with your feet as well, like we just spoke about. But write down the results and compare them. You can write them down in a chart or a graph, but yeah, document your findings and talk about the differences. So and then find other things to measure with the same and different measuring tools and compare them. So find things that you can measure length and explore length. We're going to talk about other measurement in a moment. I didn't mention cutlery either. You could use the cutlery that's the same to measure too. Anything that's the same size. Go on a search in your house and see what you can find to use to measure. But like I said before, Lego is a really great way compare length and also height. And you might have noticed on the picture on one of the slides of a little girl that had so much Lego that she actually measured her height by creating a Lego that was to represent her height. So have fun with it, find lots of things to measure. Here's another example, and I have a wooden spoon here, so you can have kitchen utensils that you could compare, measure. So go through your drawers, find containers to measure, find lots of other things to measure. Look for some objects that you could measure with Lego. If you have Lego at home, the Duplo Lego, the larger Lego, is really good. But even the smaller Lego is great to measure smaller items. So you could measure cutlery, for example, or you could measure your child's shoes, and you could measure your shoes, and then you could compare them. So find things that you could measure with the Lego in your house, or little blocks if you don't have Lego, or find something. You could even, if you've got lots of pegs, you could use pegs. Compare those objects by lining up with the Lego next to what you are measuring. And count them. So it's a really good opportunity to practice our counting skills, isn't it, with our children, and develop that number sense at the same time as measuring. Record on a chart or a graph of what you have measured. So talk about your findings with your children, and then compare the results and engage with you might have some older siblings in the house. So engage them in the measuring activities with the younger children as well. Have the whole family be measured. So now, just before I finish, I'm going to talk about just quickly volume and capacity and how we could explore that in the home too. So volume refers to the amount of space taken up by an object, whereas capacity refers to the amount an object can hold. We can certainly explore volume and capacity using the same ideas that we measure length with, including unit iteration and the relationship between measure and size. It can be measured in two ways. It can be measured, we can pack the space, or we can fill the space with a fluid unit that takes the shape of the container. And you can use lots of different containers. I have jugs here of different sizes, jars of different sizes, Tupperware containers of different sizes. You can see on the image of the screen those bottles, and you can get your children to predict how many cups of water it would take to fill each container, or how many cups of rice, or how many cups of marbles, because you can use marbles to measure as well. So this is why water and particularly sand play are critically important in the early years, from quite simple explorations of full and empty and overflowing to creating and comparing objects and applying principles of transitivity, like we talked about, transferring our knowledge from one context to another. These areas of play become very effective teaching tools for learning these concepts. So by simply providing our children with lots of different containers to explore with water and sand, we are engaging in learning about measurement, particularly volume and capacity. And we can use questions like, which container is the biggest or the smallest? How can you tell? How many scoops of sand will it take to fill the bucket? So we make predictions and we test our own hypothesis. Which container do you think holds the most water? How can we find out? So we can explore different size containers and bottles and talk about that as well. So let's measure with volume and capacity. So after the workshop today, so look at your loose parts and see if you can use the same objects to measure volume and capacity. So you could collect a range of different size containers or jars to measure. How many cups of water will it take to fill the containers or jars? Write it down, write your child's predictions down. You predict and get your child to predict as well. Engage in the play with your child and your children. Have your child predict or estimate how many cups. Write them down, record your findings on a chart or a graph. Find other things to measure with the same and different measuring units and compare. You can use flour, rice, marbles, small blocks, beads. I've even used balls here, so you can get your child to predict how many of these balls it would take to fill up a jug, and write it down and then test your hypothesis. Say, I don't know how many it's going to take, let's test. that's engaging in really important measurement activities. Marbles in a small container too, getting them to predict how many would take to fill the container. You're engaging in measurement learning with your child. It's really, really important for later maths success. So when we're thinking about mass and weight, we can explore these concepts in our homes as well. So mass is defined as the amount of matter in an object, and weight refers to the force that gravity exerts on an object. And these can be quite difficult concepts for children as they can't be seen. And so a common misconception, like we talked about earlier, is that larger things weigh more than smaller things. So it's really, so to really acquire a good understanding of mass, children need to discuss large, light things and small, heavy things and make comparisons. Balloons is a good way to do this, and I'm going to give you a balloon activity to do in a moment as well, because things like balloons, when filled with air, are very useful to explore as they take on large shapes, but they're very light. Balloons can also be used to demonstrate the different masses of different matter. For example, when filled to a specific size with water, the balloon is heavier, isn't it? Than it's when it's filled with air. So when the balloon is filled with a particular gas like helium, we don't have helium at home, or I don't know a lot of people that do, but when we're thinking about helium, we're thinking that the balloon can get significantly lighter than when it is filled with air. So balloons are a great way to explore that. So again, providing your child with a variety of different size containers or jars to explore measurement also opens up conversations and explorations about the properties of containers by asking questions like, which container is the biggest or smallest? How can you tell? And things like that. How can we find out which container holds the most, and how can we find out? So here's an activity that you can try with your child after the workshop. So if you have balloons at home, try filling them with different materials. So fill a balloon with air, fill a balloon with water, fill a balloon with rice or corn, fill a balloon with different material. If you have a sand pit or dirt, compare each one with your child and make predictions about which one they think is heaviest, which balloon is the heaviest. Why do you think that? Which balloon is the lightest? Why? Ask those questions. So enjoy exploring that with your children with balloons. Balloons are a fun way to explore that, and you're measuring. Other ways to do it is through literature and exploring measurement in stories. And this is one of my favourite stories that has a lot of maths concepts in it, but particularly measurement. So you can see some on the screen. So particularly looking at measurement, when in the story, it's a comparison with the sizes of the fruit. When the caterpillar grows, the caterpillar gets larger. There's some classification of foods into different categories. Measurement of time, which we haven't had time to talk about today, but reflecting on what time of day children eat breakfast, lunch and dinner, and day and night, and the length of time that caterpillar stayed in the cocoon. So lots of different measurement opportunities is in that story, which is a great story. So final thoughts today. A key point to note is that units, like we talked about, so it's all about engaging in informal units of measurement. So I really want you to practice with your child and have fun playing with measurement. As I said before, rulers and tape measures are important things to learn about, but it's all about getting children to be engaged with the measuring process by using other things that they can repeat. You can see that another great activity is getting your child to just collect lots of different materials from the house and then order them in order of size. So just exploring measurement and comparing size, just like that little boy in the photo there. So a key point to note is that units are arbitrary. They are used in different ways by different people in different contexts to suit different purposes. The big idea that we need to develop in children is understanding that units in many and varied forms, whether it be pegs, Lego, marbles, blocks, are a tool we can use to calculate measurements of objects and communicate these measurements to others in very meaningful ways. So it's all about getting your child to explore and engage in measurement. And so next time we meet together, we're going to explore construction by using materials like Lego, like we talked about today, and blocks to develop engineering skills. So if you haven't already I encourage you to book in for this webinar. We will engage in constructive play, explore shape and use questions to extend learning and learn about how to use those loose parts that we've talked about for a number of weeks now to enhance construction skills and learn how to embed our STEM principles in building with our children. And there's some great examples on the screen now with different things and items that you can use in the home. Tins are a great thing to explore measurement as well. So collect your tins, your tin cans, and paper rolls are another one that is fantastic thing to use for measurement too, but they can certainly be used in a number of ways to explore STEM. And so take a photo when you're engaging with measurement with your children, and I encourage you to take a photo of comparing objects by measuring them with different informal measuring tools like we talked about, pegs or blocks or Lego or balls. Measure each other, measure toys, measure the family, and take a photo, and we invite you to share it on the website. So thanks for listening today, and now it's time for me to answer some questions if you'd like to. That on the screen now, before I stop sharing, that is a fantastic illustration of comparison of measurement. See how the children have used different sized blocks, but also pumpkins that they've iterated or repeated along that line and measured them. So getting your child to engage in lots of activities like that in the home is really important to explore measurement. I'm just going to stop sharing and I'm going to ask for any questions now. And we have, well, I've gone a little bit over time, but we have time for questions. So I'll open it up to you, and I have some up my sleeve questions that I tend to get asked. So does anybody have a question? I'll start by answering my own question, and then if you think of one, you can type it in the chat and ask me. So I often get questions about, and I've used this in the maths workshops that I've done previously around technology. Oh, okay. You're welcome. You're welcome. So my children are only interested in playing with technology, and we can all relate to this at this current time that we're going through during COVID. There is more and more time spent on technology, and sometimes it's difficult. And I know I'm speaking from experience here because I do have a 15-year-old child, and he's really enjoying his technology. So sometimes it's really hard to get them off it to do anything else. So the question is, my children are only interested in playing with technology. How can I encourage them to engage in measuring activities with me when all they want to do is play games on technology? And I can certainly relate to this one. So remember when I talked about the Matchbox cars and the teddy bears? So it's all about really engaging with your child's interests. So if you've got a child that's really loving the Matchbox cars, then engage with measurement with those Matchbox cars. So see what you can measure in the house using Matchbox cars, or measure the different cars. If you've got larger cars, they've got larger cars, you can measure the different cars. Think about what you can use to measure the cars as well. But the key is to link to their interests and engage them with something that's interesting to them. If I know my son was really interested in Lego, so use Lego. I would use Lego to engage him in lots of different maths experiences and measure. So you can measure lots and lots with Lego. So, you know, I gave the example of the wooden spoon and kitchen utensils, but find things in their house. Get out his toys and see, or her toys, and see what you can measure. Dolls, teddy bears, cars, Lego constructions, or whatever they're playing with. If they're really enjoying block play, and we're going to talk about that next week, but if they're really engaged in block play, measure the different heights of their towers with things. So compare their heights of their blocks with Lego or with other things that you can measure as well. So it's all about engaging with their interests and sparking their interests to get them, or using what they're interested in on technology and getting them actively engaging with you in measurement. If you have a yard or garden, get them outside and measure whatever plants you've got growing in your garden. If you're lucky enough to have a plant garden, or if you go to the park, or if you're near a park where there's trees, or you're near a tree, go out and see if you can measure that. Take a piece of string and compare the measurements of the trunk or the leaves or flowers or the heights of plants, things like that. That's a really great way to get them engaged in nature and get them outside as well. So that's a very common one that I get asked. Another one that I get asked is, my 3-year-old doesn't know how to use a ruler. Is this a concern and what can I do about it? It certainly isn't a concern, because hopefully you've taken away today that it's more important for them to engage in measurement and by using informal measuring tools. So that a great way to start, although they love using tape measures like you saw on the slide earlier, and they love experimenting with measuring different things, they're not really understanding what they are doing if they're just using a tape measure or a ruler. So it's more important at this early stage to get them engaged in using informal measuring tools, non-standardised measurement, to measure and get them actually engaged in the process of measuring, because research has shown that if they're engaged in those processes, then the understanding will come on, and it's going to be easy for them to understand those standardized measurements of using scales and using rulers and tape measures, scales to use to measure weight. You can explore different using plastic bags or bags. You can explore weight, and that can be used as an informal measuring tool. A plastic bag or a shopping bag to compare weight is another really great way to engage in measurement. So certainly not a concern if your 3-year-old can't use a ruler. Just get them engaged in measurement. Comparing, it's all about comparing. So lining up next to each other. If they've made a road with with Lego or a train track, find something that you can measure that train track with. And that could be a line of Matchbox cars, or it could be Lego, or it could be blocks if you're lucky enough to have blocks at home. It can be cardboard boxes, cereal boxes that are the same, you can use as measuring tools. Paper, you can create your own informal units of measurement by cutting up pieces of cardboard and paper to measure. So think about tapping into their interests. So the interest of a train track, for example, and measuring by different, and they love measuring with different funny things like kitchen utensils and pegs and things that aren't toys as well, and that aren't seen as measuring tools like rulers. You could even use a ruler like this if you've got more than one, as an informal unit of measurement to measure to. But certainly children love using their feet or their hands or their body parts, like arms or, so be creative and think about what you could use. I'm just mindful of the time. We've got time for a couple more. Has anybody got a question at all, rather than me just sharing my questions or the questions that I tend to get asked? So just feel free to type into the chat. I've got it open, but another one that I often get is, activities for older children, because we know that the early years from 0 to 8, there's lots of developmental difference between a 3-year-old, for example, and an 8-year-old. So it's all about giving them just that little bit more challenges. So thinking about these play-based learning experiences, but just adding a bit more of a challenge to them. Using smaller yet measuring tools and things that are going to take a little bit longer to measure, for example, and then introducing them to more standardised measurements and comparing different things. So if you've got lucky enough to have scales, putting one thing like a car on one side and then seeing what you can use to compare to bring those scales up to balance. So whether it be marbles or little blocks or anything that you can experiment with or explore to compare that weight is another good example of using everyday items to measure balls, marbles. And you could do things like comparing, like we talked about, the size. So this is a very light ball, and comparing that weight to, for example, a marble, and comparing the size of the marble to the size of the foam ball, which is quite light, but the marble is small but heavier. So exploring different and talking about that with your child is really important. Just getting in and playing with materials. And a lot of the fun is in engaging in and going on a treasure hunt in your house and seeing what you can find to measure, seeing what you can find to use as measuring tools, seeing what you can find to actually measure, getting your child to come up with things that they'd like to measure. Oh, what could we measure now? Let's measure the couch, or let's measure the bed. They often like using their own toys though, so teddy bears or dolls or whatever they've got as a toy. So really engaging and linking in with their interests is really important. Anyone else got a question? I might just give you one more that people tend to ask me, and I really do get this one quite a lot, and I get this one with my students as well. So I teach the students in the early years program at the University of Wollongong. We teach students to become teachers. I was never good at maths at school. How can I teach my child about maths? How can I teach children about maths when I'm not good at it at all? So I take you back to that very first slide when we talked about our own feelings towards maths and our own mathematical mindset, like I called it. And we need to have a growth mindset when we're working with our children, because research says that no, just because you think you're good at maths doesn't mean that you're not good at maths. Doesn't mean that you cannot become good at maths by exploring and learning about maths. So learn alongside your child, and remember that it's really good for adults not to have all the answers, to do the exploration and the investigation with our children, and that's part of really, really effective STEM practice. So investigating and exploring with your child is really, really important. Any more? Anyone got any burning questions for me at all? Another one, I'll just finish with one unless someone thinks of another one. What other activities can I do in the home or outside the home to measure? So I've talked about getting outside into our gardens and looking for different things to measure. So just go on a hunt with your child and find different things to measure, and find different ways to measure those things, because remember, it's all about comparison and engaging in those comparing and using our questions to ask our children is really important, those open-ended questions. So getting them to predict and estimate how many cups of water it's going to take to fill that jug, how many jugs of water it's going to fill this jar, how many of these balls, if you've got a lot of golf balls at home, how many of these balls could potentially fill up this jar, and get the child to predict and estimate, and you do it as well and see who's closest to the total. I've actually seen a teacher when she was sawing a block of wood in half with her children. She got them to estimate first where they thought the middle was, and then instead of using a ruler, she got the children to use string. So, and she called it a measuring tool. So she actually used that language, and the children knew what she meant. This boy said, "Okay, I know what we can use to measure." Went straight to the cupboard and got a ball of string out, or wool, and used that. You know, if you've got wool at home, wool is a fantastic informal unit of measurement for length and distance, and predicting where the middle of something is really, really great idea to use string. So he just brought the string back, and they bent the string in half, and then they worked out where the middle was from that. So it was a game to see who was the closest to the middle. It was a bit of a competition to see who won that particular measurement game. So make it fun, make it engaging, and they'll certainly get off out of front of the TV or get off technology when you're making it engaging and playful with them, and put them in charge of the learning. So on that note, I'll say thank you very much for joining me today, and thank you for sharing in my passion, because this has been an end to the mathematics workshops that I've delivered, and I've really enjoyed them because maths and STEM is particularly one of my passions, but really important to engage in playful experiences rather than sheets and worksheets. So engage in play with your child, and it's all about the process and playing with materials. So thank you very much for joining me today. So thanks again. No other questions? Yeah. Bye. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. Bye.